Hello everyone. Today's episode of Tasteful Understated Nerd Rage is not an episode of Tasteful Understated Nerd Rage. This time I'm trying something new. Instead of complaining about things I don't like, I'll be complaining about people who don't like the things I do like as much as I do. Enter creepy, obsessive Nerdlove, where I take a classic piece of art, in this case a movie, and ruin it for everyone.
Right, so the compression and expansion of the longitudinal waves cause the erratic oscillation, you can see it there, of the neighboring particles. Guess what is it? What is it?
Can I play with it?
No, you can't play with it. You will enjoy it on as many levels as I do. The colors, children.
Today I'll be ruining one of the best movies ever, Blade Runner. If you haven't seen it, you should, and you should be aware that there will obviously be spoilers in this video, which assumes you've already seen and are familiar with the movie. I'm going to be telling you not only why I like Blade Runner, but also how I like Blade Runner. What I mean by that should become more clear as we go on. I watched this movie using certain assumptions. These aren't things that I can prove, they're things I assume for the sake of argument. If this were a geometric proof, they would be the postulates. Some of these might seem obvious, but bear with me. First, everything is deliberate. This means that anything you see in the movie was put there on purpose. Any implications or consequences of what you see are things that the filmmakers were aware of and decided to deliberately include. 2. The movie is not the book. Blade Runner is loosely based on the Philip K. Dick novel Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, and I do mean loosely based. While the novel can be a useful tool for interpreting the movie, for my interpretation, it's not strictly necessary. 3. The director's cut is the real movie. The original cut featured a crappy voiceover and a stupid ending. In this video I'll be discussing the director's cut, which has since come to be considered the real Blade Runner. 4. It's a movie made mostly by Americans and mostly for Americans. Since some of the filmmakers, including the director, are British, this assumption could just as easily be described as the audience is Anglophone. But not everyone knows what that means, so the audience is American. 5. The audience is Deckard. This assumption is fairly safe. Deckard is the protagonist of the movie, and protagonists are typically an audience stand-in to one degree or another. 6. It is an impressionist experience. This assumption is difficult to explain. Impressionism is a term I've hijacked to describe the way I not only watch movies, but play games, read books, listen to music, whatever. What this means is that I'm less concerned with what a certain image, word, or concept is meant to deliberately symbolize, and more concerned with the unconscious associations and moods it evokes in the audience. You could call these associations and moods that thing's impression. They don't emerge at any one time. Instead, they're gradually cultivated over the course of the movie. Together, they create the emotional landscape on which the action takes place. I'm using a lot of imprecise terms here, so it's probably best that I get into some examples at this point. Part 1. Eyes, Hands, and the Upper and Lower World. You don't have to look too hard at Blade Runner to notice that eyes figure prominently. The opening shot is famously reflected in Holden's eyes. The Voight-Kampff tests spot replicants by observing their iris and pupil closely, and the first person Roy and Leon visit is Chew, the engineer who designs the eyes of the replicants. Eyes, we're often told, are the window into the soul, but they're not only that. Looking directly into someone's eyes is often a confrontational act. This is part of what makes the Voight-Kampff test so intrusive, and what makes it a threatening imposition of power. Not only does it look into your eyes, it scrutinizes them with mechanical precision. Finally, they represent perspective. Empathy is often described using idioms that involve them, that to understand someone you should see things through their eyes.
You Nexus, huh? I design your eyes.
Chew. If only you could see what I've seen with your eyes.
Less commonly noticed is the importance of hands. Our introduction to Roy Batty is a shot of his hand, which eventually serves as a stand-in for his fading vitality. Twice, characters recognize replicants by their ability to stick their hands in something either very cold or very hot without freezing or burning them. And in the final action sequence, both Roy and Deckard injure their hands in some way. Hands broadly represent our means of interacting with the world, but they also carry the suggestion of class divisions. They're used to perform manual labor, which is typically done by those on the lowest rung of society. Think of Van Gogh painting the hands of the peasant and everything that implies. Finally, there are two distinct worlds in the geography of the movie. The lower world exists on street level, and it's poor, dirty, crowded, and multi-ethnic. The upper world exists far above the street, and it's thick with the signifiers of wealth, power, and security. The upper world is also entirely white, and remember, everything is deliberate and the audience is American. The first time the action moves from the lower to the upper world, the movie deliberately highlights the transition with both visuals and music. If the city of Los Angeles is the literal setting of Blade Runner, then the impressions created by the presence of eyes, hands, and the upper and lower world could be considered the emotional setting, and everything the audience sees and hears is seen and heard with these things in the back of our minds. Part 2. Post-colonialism and the Subaltern.
A new life awaits you in the off-world colonies. The chance to begin again in a golden land of opportunity and adventure.
Post-colonialism is a category of literary theory created in response to the cultural legacy of colonialism. It's complicated, difficult to understand, and neck-deep in impenetrable jargon. It's also frequently insightful. I don't think that Blade Runner's creators set out to make a movie about post-colonial theory. However, in some ways they did so by accident, and one of the terms from the vocabulary of the discipline is useful in describing my interpretation of the movie. That term is subaltern. The subaltern is a member of the culture that exists geographically outside of, and is politically subordinate to, the mother country. The subaltern has little to no power or agency in the colonial world, to the point where their history and even their opinions are not even admitted into the discussion. In fact, Gayatri Spivak wrote a famous essay in which she defined the subaltern specifically by his or her inability to speak. If you don't know who she is, don't worry about it right now, just know that she's a big deal in the world of literary theory. These replicants are what post-colonial theory would describe as subaltern. They have no voice, and their lack of a voice is what drives their behavior. Here are two examples, the descent of Rachel and the ascent of Roy Batty. The descent of Rachel. We learn the truth about Rachel in her very first scene, which in my opinion is one of the best scenes ever, where every shot and line accomplishes 2 or 3 things at once. Upon learning that Rachel is a replicant, and remember that replicants are not even allowed on Earth at all on pain of death, what happens? Is she arrested or shot? No. She's asked to leave. She's excluded from the dialogue of which she herself is the subject.
Would you step out for a few moments, Rachel?
Later, she goes to Deckard for answers, because she can't go anywhere else.
I don't know why he told you what he did.
Talk to him.
He wouldn't see me.
There, she learns what the audience already knows, that her memories are not her own, that her past is not her own, and that what she thinks of as herself is not her own. A preoccupation with the past, and the deliberate cultivation of a personal history, is a common characteristic among replicants. It's why they obsessively collect photos and mementos of what little past they do have. Her discovery of her own nature is the event that begins Rachel's exile from the upper world to the lower. She doesn't particularly like the lower world. She doesn't feel comfortable in it or like she belongs there, but she has no choice. She has become a subaltern. The ascent of Roy Batty. Roy Batty's character arc has him moving in the opposite direction, starting in the lower world and trying to get access to the upper for a pretty straightforward reason. He doesn't want to die. The Nexus 6 replicants have a 4-year lifespan. Roy was incepted in 2016 and the movie takes place in 2019, making Roy Batty 3 years old going on dead. And the only people who might be able to help are people that he's not allowed to speak to.
Morphology, longevity, incept dates.
I don't know answers.
Who does?
Tyrell. He knows everything.
Tyrell Corporation?
He's big boss, big genius. He designed your mind, your brain.
Huh? Smart.
Go.
Not an easy man to see.
Give me gold.
I guess.
He has to use every bit of his wits and take incredible risks just to have a conversation about his own impending death, and that conversation doesn't go particularly well. Neither he nor the audience will ever know if Tyrell was telling the truth in this scene. The problems of the subaltern do not merit truth, or even acknowledgement. Part 3. The Death of Roy Batty. This final sequence is what everything so far has been building towards. Batty pursues Deckard even as the last bits of sand run out of his hourglass, culminating in his final scene, where he decides to save the person who's been trying to kill him the entire movie. Why does he do this? There are a dozen theories, but I like to believe that in his helplessness and in his impending death, Roy finally saw a companion in Deckard, a kindred spirit. Having saved this kindred spirit, he performs what may be the simplest act of community there is. He sits down and tells him a story. Roy Batty's final words are some of the most famous in all of cinema, and some of the most difficult to understand. They're presented free of any context, and the viewer can't help but crave the backstory behind them. What exactly happened off the shoulder of Orion? What are C-beams, and why were they glittering in the dark near Tannhauser Gate? If you're a high-level neckbeard like me, your first instinct is to fire up the internet and read about the Blade Runner expanded universe, which hopefully contains details about the construction and history of Tannhauser Gate, as well as a detailed account of the Battle of Orion's Shoulder. But no such details exist. Not even the all-knowing internet knows any more about Roy's last words than you or I do. In a process described by Frantz Fanon, Merle Hodge, and many others, the final crime inflicted upon a subjugated people is the destruction of their history. They don't simply die, they are made to have never existed in the first place. We will never know what happened off the shoulder of Orion. We will never know where Tannhauser is, or why anyone would want to build a gate there. But by giving us this tiny glimpse of his history, in the moments before his death, Roy Batty ceases to be the subaltern. He finds his voice. This is the culmination of his ascent. Since everything is deliberate, I know that it's no coincidence that the final action sequence features constant upward movement, up the elevator, up the broken wardrobe, up the outside of the building, and finally, up into the sky, into our first glimpse of sunlight in the entire movie. Part 4. I'm not as crazy as I seem. Like I said earlier, I don't think that Ridley Scott and company set out to make a movie about post-colonialism. But they did set out to make a movie about unequal power relationships. And they set this movie in a place so rich and detailed, in which the characters and their interactions are so fully conceived, that describing them requires us to not only look closely at the world of Blade Runner, but to look closely at our own world as well. A few videos ago I claimed, for the sake of argument, that cyberpunk was not science fiction. I realized later that that wasn't really what I meant. What I meant was that the world of cyberpunk is our own world, just more so. It's a world where there are no more new continents to discover, no more new indigenous peoples to exploit. And if we can't discover any more unequal power relationships, then we will create them, just as Tyrell creates the replicants. Which brings us, finally, to Deckard. You may have noticed that all this way into a video about Blade Runner, I haven't so much as mentioned the question that's central to so many interpretations of the movie, the question of whether Deckard is a replicant or not. On the one hand, the answer is yes, because Ridley Scott says he is, and the director is basically the boss of the movie, so what he says goes. On the other hand, the answer is not important. The question is important, but not necessarily the answer. Rachel is clearly from the upper world, at least initially, and Roy is clearly from the lower one. But which one is Deckard from? He's the only character that moves freely between them. Is he of the upper world or the lower? Is he a human or a replicant? Deckard's ambiguity is our own ambiguity. Remember, he's the audience. He's us. Are we, the audience, subaltern or not? Do we have any voice in our own world or not? This question, and how skillfully and evocatively it's asked, is what makes Blade Runner the definitive cyberpunk masterpiece. It doesn't just explain to you what a subaltern is, it gives you the experience of being one, even if just a little bit, and just for a little while. This experience is woven into everything in the movie. Even after having spent all this time talking about it, there are still a half-dozen things I've skipped. The importance of language, the way Rachel's anxiety is tied up in familiar gender tropes, what exactly gaff steel is, well, I'll stop there. I'm content with just ruining half the movie instead of all of it.
Quite an experience to live in fear, isn't it? That's what it is to be a slave. I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I watched sea beams glitter in the dark near the 10-Hauser Gate. All those moments will be lost in time, like tears.